Welcome, twisted viewers, to our first Friday the 13th episode. In this story, a group of friends decide to go in the woods to debunk a curse on Friday the 13th and end up unlocking a secret they didn't know they already knew. So avoid black cats and walking under ladders while you watch this twisted tale called The Serpent's Wing. In a small town called Silver Pines, the legend of Friday the 13th was more than just a myth. Every 27 years, without fail, a group of people would disappear under mysterious circumstances. The only clue left behind was a symbol carved into the trunks of the oldest trees in the forest. A symbol the locals called the Serpent's Wing. Most of the townspeople knew better than to venture too deep into the woods on that cursed day. But like all places, Silver Pines had its skeptics. In 2024, a group of friends from a nearby city decided to challenge the legend. They were an adventurous crew led by Sarah, a paranormal podcaster and aspiring journalist who was determined to debunk the curse once and for all. Sarah had gathered her friends, Ethan, the sarcastic skeptic, Jess, her best friend who always loves a thrill, Ryan, the quiet but protective one of the group, and Claire, who is hesitant but came along for the adventure. They reached Silver Pines on the eve of Friday the 13th, staying in a rundown cabin near the forest edge. As they unpacked, they overheard the elderly innkeeper whisper to her husband, "They're just like the others. They never learn." Sarah brushed off the comment. "We're not like them," she assured herself. "This is just another urban legend." That night, they gathered around the fireplace, sharing ghost stories. But as the clock struck midnight, the air shifted. The fire flickered unnaturally, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Outside, the wind began to howl and seemed to carry through the trees. Claire shivered. "Do you guys hear that?" Everyone fell silent. The whispers grew louder, circling the cabin. Jess laughed nervously. "Probably just the wind, right?" But Sarah was already out the door, her flashlight in hand. "I need to record this," she said, eyes wide with excitement. Her friends hesitated, but they followed her into the darkness. As they proceeded into the forest, the whispers seemed to fade, replaced by an unnatural stillness. It was too quiet. Not a single bird or insect could be heard. Ethan glanced at Sarah, his courage fading. "This place feels wrong." They pushed deeper into the woods, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the thick fog that seemed to creep in from nowhere. As they walked, Sarah spotted something carved into a tree. The twisted carving, the serpent's wing. She stopped, tracing her fingers over the jagged lines. "It's just a carving," she whispered. "It doesn't mean anything." But then Ryan screamed. They turned to see him frozen in place, his flashlight pointed at something in the distance. There, hanging from the trees, were the tattered remains of old clothing, flapping in the wind. And then they saw it, a figure, standing at the edge of their light. At first glance, it looked like a person, a shadowy silhouette. But as it stepped closer, the air grew colder, and they realized it was something far worse. Its face was obscured, a shifting mass of darkness with glowing eyes that pierced through the night. Its body was covered in strange carvings, just like the ones on the trees. And in its hand, it held a long, rusted blade. Ethan took a step back. "We need to get out of here." But the figure moved faster than any of them could react, gliding silently through the trees, its eyes never leaving them. As they turned to run, the forest seemed to twist and distort around them, as if the trees themselves were alive, reaching out to trap them. The whispers returned, louder, almost deafening. They ran for what felt like hours, but no matter how far they went, the figure was always behind them, its movements impossibly fast. Claire tripped, falling hard onto the forest floor. Ryan stopped to help her, but when he looked back up, the figure was standing right in front of them. It reached out with a hand that seemed to grow impossibly long, wrapping its fingers around Ryan's throat. He gasped, clawing at the air as his body began to wither, his skin turning pale and shriveled, as though the life was being drained from him. "Run!" Ryan managed to choke out before his body collapsed into dust. Sarah, Jess, Ethan, and Claire ran in blind terror, their lungs burning with every breath. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the forest where the cabin should have been. But instead of the safety of the clearing, they found themselves back at the same tree where they had first seen the carving of the serpent's wing. The forest had looped. Jess collapsed in tears, screaming, "It's not real, it can't be real." But the figure was real. Jess closed her eyes, praying that when she opened them this would all be over. Then everything seemed quiet and Jess opened her eyes only to see the figure's face centimeters from her face. She screamed as she felt its cold, wet nose touch hers. Suddenly Jess had a strange look on her face and she stopped screaming. The creature backed off Jess and everyone stared in horror as Jess turned to stone. Then the creature walked over to her and kissed her on the forehead, making the stone crumble into dust. Sarah screamed and cried as she watched her best friend float away in a cloud of dust. Suddenly, Sarah's mind was filled with visions, horrific, disfigured images of countless others who had walked these woods before. Each face twisted in agony, all of them marked with the same marking. She saw herself in each of them. She had been here before. Every 27 years, she and her friends returned, only to be hunted, devoured, and forgotten. Just to restart the torturous cycle all over again. A voice echoed in her mind, a voice older than Earth itself. The serpent always devours. You are now part of it. You're all part of it. For the rest of time. Sarah screamed as she realized the truth. They had been sacrificed in every life before this, bound by some ancient curse that no one could escape. The figure wasn't hunting them. It was absorbing them, feeding on their fear, their very essence, over and over throughout eternity. And then Ethan made a fatal mistake. "Enough of this crap," he shouted, pulling out a small hunting knife he had carried for protection. He lunged toward the figure, slashing wildly into the air. But as his blade connected with the figure, it passed through like smoke, his body stumbling forward. The figure let out a soft growl that could have only been laughter. But before Ethan could react, the figure's hand shot forward, sinking into his chest. Ethan froze, his eyes wide with horror as a figure twisted its hand inside him. His body convulsed, and suddenly his skin began to rip, splitting apart as the symbols carved into the trees began to appear on his flesh. Ethan's screams echoed through the forest, but his voice warped, twisting into something inhuman. In seconds, Ethan's body transformed into one of the shadowy figures. His eyes glowed the same eerie light, his mouth contorted into a permanent, unnatural grin. He was no longer Ethan, but another creature bound to the curse. Claire, who had been paralyzed with fear, snapped out of her trance. "We have to leave him. We have to get out of here," she sobbed, grabbing Sarah's arm. But as they ran, the trees seemed to close in on them, their roots twisting and curling like grasping fingers. Claire, trying to find her way through the underbrush, stepped into what looked like a shallow stream. The ground gave way beneath her. Sarah turned around just in time to see Claire sink into the earth, not water, but thick, black tar. Claire struggled, reaching out for help, but the more she fought, the faster she sank. Her screams filled the air as the tar began to bubble, pulling her under with a sickening slurp. Sarah rushed towards her and black tentacles shot out of the ground, wrapping around Claire's arms and legs, dragging her deeper. Sarah wanted to help, but it was too late. Claire's body was swallowed whole by the tar, her final scream cut short as the ground solidified again, leaving no trace of her behind. Terror flooded Sarah's mind. She was the only one left. The figure was behind her, Jess turned to stone. Ethan was transformed. Claire was consumed. And Ryan had turned to dust. There was no escape. She could feel it closing in on her, the same twisting fate awaiting her. The last thing Sarah saw before the world went dark was the figure standing over her, its shadow spreading like an ink stain over the trees, the whispers now roaring in her ears, "You will return. You always do." The forest went silent again. The cycle had begun once more. Thanks for joining us on this Friday the 13th special. Sarah and her friends are bound to an unlucky curse that recycles every 27 years. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to help my channel grow. And don't forget to smash that bell icon to never miss a twisted tale. And remember, sometimes an urban legend is more than just a legend.